I'm going to look at the Stanford Prisoner Guard experiments and how it relates to high demand groups, high control groups, and new religious movements, destructive new religious movements, known in common terms, cults, which is a term that I don't like to use for many reasons. And it's not really a academic term at all. So I'm not going to talk about any known groups. I'm going to talk about groups that I have had experience with doing my own ethnographic research and observational research and visits. And I will use those as examples. So the prisoner guard experiment, famous Phil Zimbardo in the 60s, took place in Stanford University. Basically, they had participants, volunteers, they were going to be randomly assigned either as prisoners or guards, and they staged these fake arrests on the campus of Stanford, and they assigned people to be prisoners and guards. And if you watch it, it looks the guards basically became these like Wyatt Earp like, guard-like figures. If you don't know that movie, like the guys with the sunglasses, what we have here is a failure to communicate. That kind of like heavy stereotyped prison guard. And they eventually became abusive. It didn't turn out well, and they had to end the experiment. You probably all know this if you're watching this video. How does this relate to high demand, high control, high intensity groups, new religious movements, destructive new religious movements? One thing that some groups do, one very big one in particular, is they will randomly assign people jobs with various levels of responsibility. Sometimes those levels of responsibility are large, sometimes they're small. And what they do is they cycle people. So one day a person will be in charge of a training program, the next day they'll be a vice president, and the next day they could be answering phones, and the next day they could be in a little prison, a little cult prison somewhere. It's all very random. And that's kind of what happens with this Stanford Prisoner Guard thing. It's a metaphor for life, of course, that, we are kind of assigned roles or we choose roles, and I think we all have to kind of fit into those roles somehow. But when it gets extreme is when we all get concerned, and that's what we study. Probably unfortunately, but in psychology we tend to study the extreme cases to look at normative behavior. And that's what makes psychology interesting if you're into that thing. So what happens in a lot of groups like so-called cults, but it doesn't happen only in cults, is they tend to give people importance depending on what they've done for the group. And when you get that importance, of course, automatically with that comes a sense of entitlement. If you're working in an organization, you give somebody an important role and they become entitled right away, and they start becoming abusive, very, very dangerous for an organization. Very, very dangerous. If you study IO psychology, that's a very big thing. But in these high-intensity, high-control groups, what tends to happen is, again, people are randomly assigned, or they're randomly put, more or less, in close proximity to the leadership, or the guru, or the supreme deity, whoever it is. And then they start to become abusive, because often what happens is the supreme leader won't get their hands dirty. It's like, oh, I didn't know about that. And they're, the right hand or the dark hand has to do it for them. And people are often put in these positions, and they will do what they're told. And if they do what they're told, they're rewarded. And usually the reward comes in very, from a layperson, from an outside member, from an etic point of view, outside point of view. They would be considered very silly rewards that we wouldn't find interesting at all. The group, what are they called? I'm blanking on the name now. It's in Japanese, and I'm blanking on the name. Om Shindikyo, which is very famous for its horrid Tokyo chemical attack on the Tokyo subway system. So what happened was the leader, Asahara Shoko, he would give his members strands of hair, and if you got a strand of hair from him, maybe I won't give you a gray one here, you pluck out and you give him a strand of hair, and that was like, something like $1 million or $100,000, because he was blessed, and it's like having a hair from the Buddha, and if you have that hair, all your karma will be cleared. So he would use those kind of rewards, or he would give a secret teaching, or he'd let you sit next to him or talk to him or whatever. Those are the kind of rewards people were given. And until this day, that group still exists in another form. And, the members, if you watch them, interviews with them, it's as if they didn't take any responsibility for the sarin gas tacking of the largest subway system in the world, killing many people, injuring, I think it was hundreds of people, and causing total havoc, and trying to incite World War III, which they were doing. And no, that didn't happen. I don't know. We weren't responsible. It's just the level of denial is insane, and real people were killed. Real people died, and it also corrupts society. It's not just the people that die. It's horrible that they die, but it makes everyone tense, unhappy, unhealthy, for generations even. It's unfair. It's horrible. But there's no sense of personal responsibility. None. Zero. Again, because they were probably rewarded pre-incident, or they were going to be rewarded, or their reward will be to come. So that's something you see a lot of in these groups. The people that are assigned to be the kind of like guards, if you will, tend to be very nasty to those under them. If I can give some examples, I know. And this is just from a normal Buddhist group that I was doing some meditation with. This one person claimed that if you meditated a lot, that I don't know where this idea came from, because Buddhism really doesn't believe in a soul, but that your head would get pointy, right here would get very pointy, because your soul energy was trying to come out, and it's making your head pointy. I don't know how that's supposed to work. And this one teacher who had the potential to become a charismatic leader / cult leader, and kind of got close, may still be getting close. If you're watching this and you know who you are, stop it. Okay, stop it. You're a good guy, stop it. That message is for you. And you know who you are. But he would say, oh, I have a pointy head, and oh, your head isn't pointy. And it was almost like bullying. Okay, so again, this guy happened to inherit a Buddhist temple somewhere, and that didn't give him the right to bully, but again, he kind of did bully. Good guy, but he was bullied, absolutely, in his own training. In fact, the Buddhist group that he was associated with, the police were called to them, I know, several times for physically abusing the people that were being trained under them. To the point where, and this isn't another Buddhist group, but in that group I heard a story where this American guy was training in Japan in that group, and I heard it from one high-level priest who said, I wanted to beat him so bad because he wouldn't do something very simple because of a physical disability, by the way. I'm talking about this stuff openly now. I was always very nervous about this stuff, but you know what? It's wrong. It's evil. So I'm just going to talk about it because, I'm whatever. But this is the kind of mentality that is in kind of the Stanford Prisoner Guard study is behind a lot of this kind of behavior. When people get into positions of power, they start to become abusive. And it's particularly bad I'm looking at this, I have this religious thing behind me. I'm not against religion at all. In fact, I happen to like a lot of spirituality. But when it gets abused, that's when it becomes a problem. And you'll see this not only in religions, and that's why we can't pick on religion, but you'll see it in other groups. You'll see it in some quasi-psychological spiritual self-help groups. You'll see it in corporations. You'll see it in law firms, in businesses. And when you start to see it, it really, really, in order for a corporation, a company, an organization to function long-term, it has to be changed. It has to be stopped. In the case of that guy who is the Buddhist teacher I'm telling you about, you know, he lost his position. He, like 3 people know who this person is, and it's not that important, so I'm not going to, I'm not hurting anybody by saying this, but he lost his position. He lost the faith of a lot of people. He lost his family. And, you know, you can't, those systems are not sustainable for very long, and they always come out. So this is a very important study, the Stanford Prisoner Guard study, and it's very important to look at examples in the real world. And it's very good to look at how people get into these traps, these kind of cognitive loops. In class, we talked about this as the closed logic system. It's just amazing to see it, because the question is, what do you do in that situation? I kind of sat there and listened and grinned, and he was a nice enough guy that when I heard the pointy head story, I kind of dealt with it, and eventually I left. I couldn't take it anymore, and the people that devoted their lives to this guy got screwed, honestly. And this is mainstream religion. This is mainstream religion, you know, mainstream religion. And he just I don't care. That's antisocial behavior. That's psychopathic behavior. And a lot of people that rise to some positions of power that have those tendencies, not everyone does, certainly not. Not all successful people have those tendencies at all. But you have to watch out, because not only to protect those people that they're going to harm, but to protect them too, because they cannot be sustained. It never has been. Any system where somebody was a bully, it only lasts so long, and it never ends up well, for the person or for the victims. Okay, take care.